What's the worst thing you've done at jiu-jitsu? Well, here are two of mine. The first is fairly innocent, fairly innocuous. The second is an absolute doozy. Trust me, you want to stay tuned for that one. Now, the amazing people at Renegade appearing in my B-roll would never do the things that you're about to hear in this video, and you probably shouldn't either. I want to be clear that I was young and needed the money. I've reformed since the events of this video, and I certainly wouldn't engage in any of these behaviours now, but they make for pretty good stories, and it would be a shame to waste them. They're also arguably not confessions, but it felt like two jiu-jitsu confessions would go a little bit more viral than two jiu-jitsu stories, and I am trying to submit myself to the wheels of the algorithm so that I can buy a new Ferrari or even a new loaf of bread in this economy. Ha ha ha, it certainly is the current time, isn't it? Like and share to support the channel as well as supporting those who support us. Today's episode is brought to you by clothing. Are you currently naked or undressed? Then look into clothing today. It comes in various sizes and styles for all your covering needs. Alright, without further ado, Confession 1. It's 2011. I've been watching a lot of UFC and I am hooked. It's not something I ever expected to get into. I saw a clip of some dude having his leg turned into 2-minute noodles once way back in the day and determined such bloodthirsty spectacles were not fit for such sophisticated and discerning gentlemen as I. However, me and my mate used to get blasted and play the video game, and through the transformative power of video games and intoxicants, this eventually led to me watching a couple of cards, and unexpectedly, I was hooked pretty quickly. In particular, the stuff BJ Penn could do blew my mind, and I had to do this BJJ stuff. I googled some, flipped an email to Ben Hall of Carson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and headed down with my best mate. That's him here. Hello, Paul. You'll meet him again in Confession 2. I learned I needed to get fitter, but it seemed pretty cool and I was keen to do more. Other than that, class was unremarkable. Well, except for one thing. I'm rolling with some guy, it's no gi, and I believe he was a white belt. I've never rolled with anyone before, and while I'm sure I've probably seen the odd clip, I've never even really seen BJJ before other than in MMA, and so all I've really absorbed in that time as a fan is that there are no strikes allowed. This some guy, no offense to the man, he was as fine a gentleman as you will see when you only meet someone once and then never again, unless I did see him again, I'm not sure, I don't recall. But anyway, I'm in his guard and he sort of wraps his arms up around behind my back and attaches himself firmly to my chest. At this point, as I'm unable to detach him by trying to push him down, I do something fairly foolish, something you'd never think anyone would be stupid enough to do in a jiu-jitsu class, and I collapse forward and slam him into the mat. I don't do it particularly hard. I don't know it's not allowed, but I'm also aware it's a fairly hectic act. I guess I sort of just assumed that BJJ guys gently slam each other into the mat all the time. Luckily, the guy and Ben were pretty understanding of my ignorance, the rules were explained, and we moved on, but in retrospect, I get a good chuckle out of slamming a guy into the mat in my first class. I didn't hurt him, that I know of. Okay, yep, look, fairly mild confession, I see that. Well, we're about to up the ante a fair bit, stuff's about to get fairly hectic. So in the interests of trying desperately to tie this story into some kind of confessions theme, many of you will have been told by people not to roll when you're on the sauce or at parties, that it's dangerous or sets a bad example. Now, I'm not here to judge anyone, but in line with that theme, make of this story what you will. It's the year 2014. Me and my best mate Paul have been at a party with our other mate Jared. Shout outs to Jared, by the way, the guy now trains BJJ himself, and I will be making some content with him in the near future. It's been a rowdy evening of celebration for a special occasion, and we head back to Jared's for some post-party chills. While we're chilling, I tell Paul that I've just learned how to do the triangle properly in class. We're now several years deep into our love of combat sports. Indeed, we were together at that moment because I'd flown down to Tasmania to actually shoot some combat sports. Paul has taken some amazing shots of me over the years that are every bit as iconic to my brand as the ones that I have taken myself. Oh, and here he is with me at UFC 293, doing the tech behind the scenes while I shoot. From playing the video game and slowly getting into the sport together to shooting it in person, all on the power of dreams and pretty expensive cameras. Aside from his usefulness to me though, I also quite like the guy. Anyway, I digress. Paul asked me if I can teach him said triangle choke. I figure we've had a few, but it's just teaching a move. We're not rolling or anything. Where's the harm? I show him the triangle with me on bottom and talk him through the setup a couple of times and then get him to do it on me. I remember it took a couple of attempts for him to get used to it and sink it in, but eventually he gets there and I tap. Now pause. Something really, really bad is about to happen. What do you think it could be? So I was in this story from my past and something bad was about to happen when all of a sudden something bad happened. And I should warn you, from this point onwards, this story gets pretty hectic, pretty gross. I tapped to my friend's successful triangle choke, he began to release, and as I moved to stand up, there's a very loud crack. It's easily audible above the tunes we have on and picked up by Jared making a sandwich a few rooms away in the kitchen. The sound was akin to snapping apart a large tree branch filled with light globes, a loud snap and a much quieter shattering underneath it. Immediately, I assume, logically enough, that Paul has broken something. But looking down at his face, he looks very calm as he's slowly reaching towards his leg. Given that look, I figured that the sound must have been his phone breaking in his pocket under the pressure of him contorting his leg to do the triangle. I moved back somewhat, and sadly, it's not the phone that's broken. Oh, his leg's broken all right. Horribly. No bone has broken the skin, but his lower leg is snapped and twisted around to the point that it's running parallel to his thigh. There's a brief moment where I think both of us are sort of staring at and willing it not to be real before he starts telling me rather insistently, "Make it look normal, man. Make it look normal." My mind is absolutely racing, but something is telling me pretty clearly that that's a bad idea. Stupidly, I ask, are you sure? It could make it worse. Yes, beep, make it look normal, he barks, the shock and panic clear in his voice. Oh brother, I'm a long way from the guy who avoided MMA because of a video of a broken leg right now. There's a huge temptation to flip out if I'm completely honest. Just catch the next cab and let Jared deal with the unfolding horror on his lounge room floor. But I'm very aware this is my guy and I can vomit my guts out at the horror of his leg later. Steel myself, though if I'm honest, I'm mostly adrenaline at this point anyway. I can tell the panic of him seeing his leg in such a twisted mess is really sending him. And so, pressed on by his insistence, I grab his lower calf and I twist everything back into some semblance of the shape of a leg. He doesn't immediately die from severing a femoral artery and I don't vomit, so bonus. I then try to call the ambulance, but my hands are shaking way too hard from the adrenaline. I've never felt anything like this before, and it's overwhelming. Luckily, Jared, who by this point has returned from preparing a sandwich in the kitchen to realise the horror now befalling his lounge room, is able to call the ambulance instead. Now, there's not a ton more to tell from there. We waited what felt like an eternity from the ambulance, probably less the time it took and more the double femoral break. My mans took it like an absolute champ, never cried out in pain, and the paramedics when they arrived were absolutely amazing. All in all, fairly distressing night. We learned in time that Paul had indeed sustained a double femoral break. The ambulance guy said it was the type of break they would have expected from a motorcycle accident, not late night jiu-jitsu shenanigans. Apparently limbs can bend fairly far, but if they spiral or turn, apparently they just shatter. Alas, Paul grabbing his leg with force over the fulcrum of my shoulder did exactly that. Good effort, Paul. Now, I had no idea exactly what had happened at the time, but Paul was later able to clarify that he thought it would be amusing that if at the moment I tapped, he chose to reef the submission back on as hard and as tight as he could, putting all his weight down onto that leg, resulting in the freakish break. This is all good, by the way, just a little bit of a laugh. I would have just tapped again and it would have been all over. I guess in the end, from a very detached perspective, it was kind of amusing, though certainly not for Paul, Jared or I at that time. So there you go, my two BJJ confessions. One fairly weak, the other pretty hectic. What are your BJJ confessions? I'd love you to leave them in the comments and I'll do a future episode on them. Thanks for watching, like, share and subscribe. Until next time, peace. Now, I know some of you will be wondering, so how did everything work out? Is Paul okay? And sadly, I have to report that unfortunately he passed away as a result of his broken leg. No, not really. It was just a broken leg. Of course he's fine. Now, obviously, I didn't go into heaps of detail about what was going on in his head at the time. I gather it was probably something like, ow, ow, ow. I don't think my leg is meant to bend that way. I can only, of course, tell a story from my own perspective, though I'm aware anything I was going through in that moment pales into insignificance compared to the suffering of my dear friend. And lastly, a big thank you to the Renegaders for donating their likenesses to the B-roll. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you, Ollie. Thank you, Coach Jamie. And thank you, Joe. Also, Ollie, we really, really miss you. Please come home anytime. Bye.